The cemetery was quiet, wrapped in a cold mist that crept between the crooked headstones. A light drizzle made the marble markers shine as if the dead themselves were weeping. At the far end, near an old oak tree whose branches swayed like a mourner's hands, a 7-year-old girl knelt on the damp earth. Her dress was too thin for the weather. Her knees sank into the mud, but she didn't seem to care. In her small hands, she held a wilting flower she had plucked from the roadside. Her lips trembled, and when she finally whispered, the words came out soft, fragile, as if even the wind might break them. "Daddy, can't hear me anymore." Her voice cracked. She pressed the flower down onto the grave. Her little fingers shook as she traced the carved name on the cold stone. The rain washed her tears into the soil, mixing grief with the earth itself. Just a few feet behind her, a tall man in a dark coat stopped mid-step. His eyes widened. He had come here by chance, drawn to the quiet graveyard to leave flowers for his own parents, and instead he found himself frozen at this heartbreaking sight. He didn't know the girl, but the pain in her voice cut straight through his chest like a blade. Before we continue, I want to ask you something. Please leave a comment below and rate this story from 1 to 10. Tell me, have you ever stood by a grave and whispered something you wished your loved one could hear? If there's something on your heart, I'm here to listen. You're not alone. As you watch this story unfold, I hope you find both courage and healing. The man's name was Alexander Reed, 45 years old, a self-made millionaire in real estate. His life looked perfect on the outside, tall mansions, luxury cars, business empires, but inside, Alexander carried a loneliness he couldn't erase. Years ago, he had lost his own wife and unborn child in a tragic accident. Since then, he visited cemeteries often, not out of morbid fascination, but because he felt the silence of the dead was somehow kinder than the noise of the living world. And now, watching this tiny girl whisper to her father's grave, he felt as if the past and present collided. The girl's shoulders trembled. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. Behind her, standing a few feet away, was a woman in her early 30s, dressed in black. Her face was sharp, her eyes cold as steel. She didn't cry. Instead, she tapped her heel impatiently against the wet ground. This was Clara, the girl's stepmother. "Enough already, Emma," Clara snapped. Her voice carried no sympathy. "Your father is gone. Stop wasting time crying like this. We have other things to do." The girl, Emma, flinched. She pressed herself closer to the grave as if trying to shield herself with the stone. Her lips quivered, but she didn't argue. She whispered again, this time even softer. "Daddy, I miss you." Clara's eyes narrowed. She reached forward, yanking Emma's thin arm so roughly that the flower slipped from her hand and fell into the mud. Alexander's fists tightened in his pockets. Something about the cruelty in Clara's grip made his heart pound. He took a step forward before he even realized what he was doing. "Is this how you treat a child?" Alexander's voice thundered across the quiet cemetery. Clara jerked back, startled. Her eyes flickered to the stranger's tall frame. He looked powerful, commanding, the kind of man people didn't dare to challenge. She quickly rearranged her face into something sweet and pitiful. I didn't mean to be harsh," she stammered. "She's just stubborn sometimes. I only want what's best for her." But Alexander had already seen the truth. The girl's thin wrist bore faint bruises. Her shoes were worn. Her cheeks were pale with hunger and grief. Emma lifted her teary eyes toward him, and for a split second, hope flickered there, like a candle trembling in the wind. That night, the house Emma lived in stood like a cold shadow on the edge of town. It was large, but inside it felt empty, hollow, like a place where laughter had long died. Clara walked through the rooms with her chin high, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floors. She had married Emma's father only a year ago. He had been a respected man, a modest businessman with a kind smile, but his sudden death in an accident left everything in Clara's hands. Now she was the guardian of the estate, the accounts, and most importantly, Emma. Emma sat quietly at the dinner table, her small hands folded in her lap. A plate of food sat untouched before her. "Eat," Clara ordered. "You won't get up until that plate is clean." Emma lifted her fork, her hand trembling. She picked at the cold meat and forced a bite into her mouth. She chewed slowly, her face pale. Clara watched her with eyes sharp as knives. When Emma finally whispered, her voice was barely audible. It hurts to swallow." Clara's hand slammed against the table, making the silverware jump. "Don't talk back to me. You think life is easy? You're lucky I even keep you in this house." Emma's eyes welled up again. She bent her head, hiding her tears in the shadow of her hair. In that moment, the sound of a car pulling up outside echoed through the silence. Clara frowned and stood. When she opened the door, her face froze. Alexander Reed stood on the doorstep. His black coat dripped with rain. His presence filled the doorway like a storm about to break. "Good evening," he said, his voice calm but steady. "I came to check on the girl." Clara blinked rapidly, feigning surprise. "Oh, you mean Emma? How kind of you, but there's no need. She's fine, perfectly fine." Behind her, Alexander's sharp eyes caught Emma's fragile figure at the table. Her shoulders were slumped, her face pale, her fork still frozen mid-air. "She doesn't look fine," Alexander replied. He stepped inside without waiting for permission. Clara's smile faltered. "Sir, you can't just—" But Alexander was already kneeling beside Emma. His deep voice softened. "Emma, are you okay?" The girl looked at him, her lips trembling. Then, with the faintest whisper, she shook her head. Clara's face turned crimson. She rushed forward. "She's lying. She always makes up stories for attention. Don't listen to her." Alexander's hand rose, silencing her instantly. His eyes burned with quiet fury. "Don't," he warned. "Speak another word against her." For the first time, Clara felt the weight of someone she couldn't manipulate. Emma clutched the edge of Alexander's sleeve as if it were a lifeline. She didn't say much. She couldn't. But her whisper at the grave echoed in his mind. "Daddy can't hear me anymore." And in that moment, Alexander knew. If he didn't act, no one else would. The storm outside deepened, rattling the windows of the house. Alexander sat in the living room with Emma curled silently on the couch beside him. She clutched a small stuffed rabbit, its ears worn and its seams loose, the only comfort left from her late father. Clara paced back and forth, her heels striking the floor in irritation. She forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Mr. Reed," she began, her voice coated in false sweetness. "You really mustn't interfere. Emma is my responsibility now. My late husband entrusted her to me. I've done everything to raise her properly." Alexander's sharp eyes flicked toward her. Raising a child doesn't mean starving her or dragging her around like a prisoner. Clara froze, her lips parting as if struck. Then she forced a laugh, light and dismissive. "You misunderstand. Children can be dramatic. They cry, they pout, they pretend to be sick to get attention. Emma is no different. You don't know her the way I do." Emma pressed closer to Alexander, her small fingers tightening around his sleeve. She didn't speak, but her watery eyes told the truth. Alexander bent down to her level, his voice low and warm. "Do you want to stay here tonight, Emma?" The girl hesitated. Her lips trembled. She gave the faintest nod. Clara's face twisted in fury, though she quickly masked it. "That's impossible. She's my stepdaughter. I can't have strangers interfering with family matters." Alexander rose to his full height, his presence commanding. "I don't care about your rules. If I find one more bruise on her, you'll be answering to more than just me." For the first time, Clara's composure cracked. Her eyes flickered with fear, but then she lowered her lashes, covering her face in a mask of innocence. "I'm pregnant, Mr. Reed," she whispered softly, placing a hand over her stomach. "Stress is bad for me. Please don't make this harder." The words hung in the air. Emma's eyes widened in confusion, as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. Alexander's jaw tightened. Something about Clara's tone felt rehearsed, too polished, like lines in a play. Later that night, after Alexander left reluctantly, Emma sat alone in her room. Clara burst in without warning. Her eyes burned with rage. "You little liar," she hissed, grabbing the rabbit from Emma's hands and throwing it into the corner. "How dare you cling to that man and make me look like a monster?" Emma whimpered, reaching for the toy. Clara's hand lashed out, yanking her by the arm. "If you ever whisper to him again, I'll lock you in the basement for a week. Do you understand?" Emma nodded frantically, tears streaking her face. Clara released her, sneering. "Good. Remember who owns this house, little mute. Your father is dead, and now you belong to me." When Clara finally left, slamming the door behind her, Emma crawled across the floor to pick up the rabbit. She hugged it tightly, rocking back and forth. Her lips moved silently, as if she were speaking to the grave again. "Daddy, can't hear me anymore." The next day, Alexander couldn't shake the image of Emma's bruised wrist. He returned to the house under the excuse of bringing documents for Clara, contracts tied to the estate her late husband had left behind. As Clara signed the papers with exaggerated grace, Alexander's eyes wandered to the kitchen. There, quietly scrubbing dishes, was a young maid named Grace. Her timid eyes flickered toward Emma, who sat silently at the table, poking at a slice of bread. For a moment, Grace's gaze softened with pity, then quickly darted away when Clara glanced over. Alexander noticed. He stored the detail away. "Emma seems unwell," he said calmly. "Has she seen a doctor recently?" Clara smiled too quickly. "Of course. The doctor said she's simply shy and malnourished because she refuses food. I try my best. But she's stubborn, you see. Very stubborn." Emma lowered her head, pressing the bread between her tiny fingers. Alexander caught the faint shake of her head. She was silently disagreeing. That night, Alexander sat in his own study at home. The rain tapped against the tall windows of his mansion, but his mind wasn't on business. He replayed Emma's trembling lips, her whispered words at the grave, and Clara's two perfect explanations. He reached for a leather-bound notebook on his desk. Inside were sketches he sometimes made to clear his head. That evening, instead of buildings or landscapes, he found himself drawing a child kneeling by a grave. Above her, in shaky handwriting, he wrote the words, "Daddy can't hear me anymore." He stared at the words until his vision blurred. The following week, the truth began to unravel in fragments. Alexander visited the house again, this time bringing gifts for Emma, a box of crayons, sketchbooks, and warm clothes. Emma's eyes lit up faintly when she saw them. She clutched the crayons like treasures, as if no one had ever given her something so simple yet precious. When Clara stepped out to take a phone call, Alexander knelt beside Emma. "Do you like to draw?" She nodded shyly. "Then draw anything you want," he whispered. "No one will be angry." Emma bent over the paper, her small hands trembling. Slowly, she sketched a house, a dark basement door, and a figure standing with cruel eyes. Beside it, she drew a stick figure of herself curled up on the floor. Over the picture, she wrote one word in crooked letters. "Help." Alexander's chest tightened. He reached out, gently covering the paper with his hand before Clara could return. His heart raced with rage and sorrow. When Clara walked back in, smiling faintly, she didn't notice the folded paper Alexander slipped into his coat pocket. That evening, Alexander returned home and unfolded the drawing under the light of his study lamp. The child's shaky letters seemed to scream louder than any spoken word. He pressed his hand to his forehead, guilt and anger swirling inside him. For years, he had told himself he didn't deserve to be a father again, not after losing his own child. But now, fate had placed Emma in his path, whispering at her father's grave, crying out with silent pictures, and he knew, with a certainty that burned in his chest, he couldn't walk away. The sun had barely risen when Alexander returned to the Carter estate. The house loomed over the wet garden, its windows shuttered as if hiding secrets. He rang the bell, and this time it was not Clara who opened the door, but the maid, Grace. Her eyes widened when she saw him. For a moment she looked as if she wanted to speak, but Clara's voice echoed sharply from the hallway. "Grace, don't stand there gaping. Let him in." Grace stepped aside silently, lowering her head. Alexander noticed the way her hands twisted nervously in her apron. She was afraid. Clara appeared, her smile flawless. "Mr. Reed, what a surprise again. You're very kind to visit us so often. Emma, come here and thank our guest." Emma emerged slowly from the corner, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly. She gave Alexander a small, fleeting glance, then looked down again. Clara's hand pressed firmly on her shoulder, guiding her forward. "Say thank you." Emma's lips parted, but no sound came. Her throat worked silently, then she dropped her gaze. Clara's smile didn't falter, but her nails dug slightly into Emma's thin shoulder. Alexander's eyes darkened. That afternoon, Alexander decided to search for the truth beyond the walls of Clara's house. He drove to the neighborhood bakery, where the elderly neighbor, Mrs. Linda Green, was known to spend her mornings. Linda was in her 60s, her silver hair tied in a bun. When Alexander introduced himself, her face softened warmly. "Ah, yes, you must be Mr. Reed. Everyone in the neighborhood knows you by reputation. And you've been visiting Emma, haven't you?" "Yes," Alexander replied. "I'm worried about her. I want to know. Have you seen anything unusual at their home?" Linda hesitated, glancing around before lowering her voice. "I've heard the child cry many nights, loud enough that even with my windows closed I could hear her sobbing. But when I asked Clara, she always said Emma was sick, or throwing tantrums. Clara is very charming, you know. Everyone praises her." Her lips pressed together, guilt flickering in her eyes. "I thought maybe it wasn't my place. But the truth is, Emma never looked happy. She looked starved for love." Alexander nodded, his chest heavy. He thanked Linda, but his mind was already racing. The next day, he visited Emma's school. The homeroom teacher, Miss Olivia Scott, greeted him cautiously. She was in her early 30s, her brown hair neatly tied, her eyes clear and serious. "I'm sorry to intrude," Alexander began, "but I'm concerned about Emma Carter. She's in your class, isn't she?" Olivia's face tightened with concern. She pulled out a folder from her desk and placed it before him. Inside were reports, handwritten notes about Emma's declining weight, her absent-mindedness, her struggles to concentrate. "I've sent these to her guardian several times," Olivia said, but the only one who responded was Mrs. Clara. She insisted Emma was just a picky eater and that nothing serious was wrong. "But I don't believe that." She sighed, her voice trembling slightly. "Emma often sits alone at recess, whispering to herself. Sometimes I hear her say, 'Daddy can't hear me anymore.' It breaks my heart." Alexander's throat tightened. The words struck him like a knife. He clenched the folder, swallowing the wave of emotion that threatened to overwhelm him. "Thank you, Miss Scott," he said hoarsely. "You've helped me more than you know." That evening, back at his mansion, Alexander sat alone in his study. On the desk lay Emma's drawing with the word "help," Linda's quiet testimony, and Olivia's school reports. Each piece was small, fragile, but together they formed a truth he could no longer deny. Emma was in danger. For years, Alexander had avoided responsibility, burying himself in wealth and silence. But now, staring at the trembling handwriting and sketches of a frightened child, he knew the time had come to act. Meanwhile, at the Carter estate, Clara was tightening her control. She locked Emma's bedroom door earlier each night, claiming it was for her safety. She reduced her meals again to thin bowls of porridge and wilted vegetables, and when Emma whispered too loudly to her stuffed rabbit, Clara snatched it away and locked it in the cupboard. "You don't need anyone but me," Clara hissed. "Do you understand? That man, Mr. Reed, he's not your savior. He doesn't care about you. He'll disappear, just like your father." Emma's tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She hugged her knees to her chest, whispering so softly it barely reached her own ears. "Daddy can't hear me anymore." The following morning, Alexander returned again. He carried with him a bouquet of fresh lilies, saying they were for the grave. Clara accepted them with her sugary smile, though her eyes flickered with irritation. Over lunch, Alexander noticed Grace clearing the table. This time he caught her gaze firmly and held it. For a moment, she looked ready to cry. Her lips parted, then pressed shut again. When Clara stepped into the kitchen, Alexander quietly slipped a business card into Grace's hand. Her eyes widened. He didn't say a word. He only gave her a nod that said, "When you're ready, call me." Grace's hand trembled as she slid the card into her pocket. That night, Alexander couldn't sleep. He walked through his empty mansion, the halls echoing with silence. For the first time in years, the loneliness felt unbearable. He poured himself a glass of water and stared at his reflection in the tall windows. "What am I doing?" he muttered. "Am I strong enough to protect her?" He thought of his own lost child, the wife whose face still haunted him in dreams. The guilt that had chained him for so long whispered, "You failed once, you will fail again." But then he remembered Emma's whisper at the grave, the drawing with the word, "Help," the faint flicker of hope in her eyes when she looked at him, and he answered aloud, firm and steady, "Not this time." The next day, Grace called. Her voice shook on the phone. "Mr. Reed," she whispered, "I can't stay silent anymore. I've seen Mrs. Clara lock Emma in the basement, sometimes for days. She takes away her meals, forces her to eat rotten food. If Emma cries, she beats her with a belt. I wanted to report it, but I'm afraid. I have no family but my mother, and I need this job." Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. His voice dropped low but carried steel. "You've done enough by telling me. From now on, I'll do the part of a father." Grace began to cry softly. Relief and fear tangled together. When Alexander hung up, he stared out of the window. The city lights glowed in the distance, but all he could see was the shadow of a little girl at a grave, whispering that her father couldn't hear her anymore. His chest swelled with a fierce resolve. This time, Alexander would not remain silent. The days that followed grew darker for Emma. Clara, sensing Alexander's growing presence, tightened her grip on the child like a snake coiling around its prey. Locks clicked earlier at night. The meals grew smaller, sometimes nothing more than a crust of bread and a glass of water. Clara's voice dripped venom with every word. "You think Mr. Reed will save you? He won't. He'll leave, just like your father, and when he does, you'll have no one but me. So stop dreaming." Emma hugged her stuffed rabbit tighter whenever she could sneak it back from the cupboard. In the silence of her locked room, she whispered into its torn ears, "Daddy can't hear me anymore, but maybe someone else will." Meanwhile, Alexander worked quietly but relentlessly. Grace had given him his first proof, a secret recording from her phone. The audio was faint but clear enough. Clara's voice snapped through the speaker. "You're nothing but a burden. Cry all you want. Your father's gone, and now you'll do as I say." Alexander closed his eyes as the words echoed in his study. His jaw clenched and his hand tightened into a fist. Each syllable was like a blade cutting through his chest. He copied the file onto multiple drives. One piece of evidence. More would come. The following evening, Alexander returned to the Carter estate under the guise of bringing legal documents. Clara greeted him at the door, her face glowing with a rehearsed smile. She pressed a hand over her stomach delicately. "I just came back from the doctor," she said sweetly. "I'm 2 months pregnant. The stress you're causing isn't good for me." Alexander's eyes narrowed. "Pregnant?" "Yes," Clara nodded, holding up a paper with an official-looking stamp. "Here's the medical certificate, verified." Alexander took it, examining the seal. Something about it seemed off, too new, too perfect, as though it had been printed yesterday. He slipped it quietly into his briefcase. "Congratulations," he said flatly, his tone unreadable. But inside, he felt his suspicions harden. Clara was playing a deeper game, using lies and forged documents to protect her control. Later that night, Grace slipped a folded page into Alexander's hand as she cleared the dishes. He opened it once he was alone in his car. It was Emma's drawing again. This time she had sketched herself behind a locked door. Above it, in shaky letters, she had written one word: basement. Alexander's heart pounded. He knew now where to look. The next morning he confronted the old electrician who had once repaired the Carter mansion. The man, Robert Hayes, spoke in a hushed tone, his weathered hands trembling slightly. "I don't know much," Robert admitted, "but when I was fixing the wiring near the basement last year, I heard muffled cries. Sounded like a child. When I asked Clara, she said it was the television. But there was no television down there." He shook his head. "I thought about reporting it, but she's persuasive, that woman. I didn't want trouble." Alexander's jaw tightened. Another piece of the puzzle snapped into place. That evening, Alexander visited the school once more. Miss Olivia Scott met him with heavy eyes. "I'm glad you came," she whispered. "I was about to file a complaint myself. Emma is wasting away before my eyes. Her grades are dropping. She looks terrified every time she's called on in class. I've written several reports, but they were always intercepted." "Intercepted?" Alexander asked sharply. "Yes," Olivia confirmed. "Every time Clara came to pick them up, she always said she'd handle it, but nothing changed." She hesitated, then added, "2 days ago, Emma fainted in class. When I asked if she had eaten, she just shook her head." Alexander closed his eyes briefly, his chest burning with rage. When he opened them again, they burned with cold resolve. Meanwhile, Clara was preparing her own plan. In the kitchen, she whispered to Grace with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "I'm arranging for a child psychologist to evaluate Emma. He'll confirm what I already know, that she's unstable, maybe even dangerous to herself. Once that report is official, no one will question me again." Grace's hands froze around the plates she was washing. She lowered her eyes quickly, hiding the fear in them. Clara continued, her voice a low hiss. "And if Alexander Reed interferes, I'll take him down too. Men like him have skeletons. I'll find his weakness." She turned away, but Grace's heart hammered in her chest. That night, she called Alexander in secret. "She's planning something," Grace whispered. "She wants to declare Emma sick so she can keep her locked away legally. Please, you must act fast." Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. "Thank you, Grace. Don't lose hope. The truth is already on our side." The next day, Alexander stood at Emma's father's grave. He laid down fresh lilies and whispered to the silent stone, "I couldn't save my own child, but I swear to you, I will save yours. She won't whisper alone anymore." Behind him, the wind stirred the branches of the oak tree, and though the cemetery was empty, Alexander felt a strange strength settle over him, as if the dead themselves had lent him their silent blessing. That evening, Alexander installed a small camera near the Carter estate, hidden in the garden facing the basement window. He needed undeniable proof. The footage that appeared the next morning shattered him. The camera showed Clara dragging Emma by the arm, shoving her into the basement, and locking the door. Emma's small fists pounded weakly against the wood before sliding down, her body curled against the cold ground. Alexander's hand shook as he replayed the clip, but with each replay, his resolve grew sharper, harder. Now he had what he needed. The time for silence was over. The video footage burned in Alexander's mind like fire. Again and again, he saw Emma dragged, shoved, locked away in the dark. Every time her small fists pounded against the door, it echoed in his chest like thunder. He couldn't wait anymore. That afternoon, he called his attorney, Michael Turner, a man in his early 50s with a calm but razor-sharp mind. When Alexander showed him the evidence, Turner's face hardened. "This isn't just neglect," Turner said grimly. "This is abuse. With this footage, with the testimony of the maid and the teacher, we can petition for emergency custody. But we'll need more: medical examination, school reports, anything that proves a pattern." "I have it all," Alexander replied, sliding the folder across the table, "and I'll get more if needed. Just tell me what to do." Turner studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Prepare yourself. Clara won't surrender easily. People like her never do. But once this goes to court, her lies will collapse." Meanwhile, at the Carter estate, Clara was busy polishing her mask of perfection. She hosted neighbors for tea, speaking softly about her delicate pregnancy and her difficult but beloved stepdaughter. "She struggles," Clara sighed dramatically, her hand resting on her belly. "Poor Emma refuses food, refuses to socialize, but I'm patient. I just want her to be healthy." The neighbors nodded, their eyes filled with sympathy. None of them saw Emma locked upstairs, her stomach aching with hunger. From behind a curtain, Emma watched the gathering silently. She clutched her stuffed rabbit to her chest, whispering into its fur. "Daddy can't hear me anymore, but maybe Mr. Reed can." 2 days later, Alexander returned with Turner at his side. They knocked firmly on the heavy wooden door. Clara opened it, her smile faltering when she saw not only Alexander, but a man in a dark suit carrying a leather briefcase. "What is this?" she demanded. "My attorney," Alexander replied coolly. "We're here to talk about Emma." Clara's eyes flickered. She forced a laugh. "Emma? She's resting. Poor child has been unwell lately, but thank you for your concern. Really, Mr. Reed, you should stop interfering." Turner's voice was calm but carried weight. "Mrs. Clara Carter, we have substantial evidence of child abuse in this home. If you refuse to cooperate, we will file immediately for emergency custody and bring law enforcement to your doorstep." For the first time, Clara's smile cracked completely. Her eyes flashed with rage. "You dare threaten me? This is my house. Emma is my stepdaughter. You have no right." Alexander cut her off, his voice low and sharp. "I have every right when a child is suffering. Where is she?" Clara's chest heaved. For a moment she looked ready to scream, but then she straightened, smoothing her hair with icy calm. "She's upstairs," she said coldly. "But don't think you can just take her. You'll regret this, both of you." When Alexander entered Emma's room, his chest tightened. She sat curled on the bed, her cheeks pale, her eyes swollen. The rabbit was missing again. She looked up, startled, but when she saw Alexander, her lips trembled, and for the first time in days, a flicker of relief appeared. "Emma," he whispered gently, kneeling beside her, "it's going to be okay." Her small hands reached for his sleeve, clinging as if afraid he would vanish. Turner cleared his throat. "Mr. Reed, we should go. We have what we need. The court will act quickly with this evidence." Alexander lifted Emma into his arms. She clung to him tightly, her face buried in his shoulder. For a moment he felt the weight of his own past, the child he had lost, the guilt he had carried. But this time his arms tightened with resolve. No more silence. That night, Clara stormed through the house like a tempest. She smashed a vase against the wall, shards scattering across the floor. "He thinks he can steal her from me?" she spat, pacing wildly. "No one steals from me, no one!" She grabbed the phone, dialing quickly. "Victor," she hissed when the line picked up. "It's time. File the papers. I want Emma declared unstable immediately. Use the psychologist. Use the pregnancy certificate. I don't care. Just bury them before they bury me." Her voice dropped to a venomous whisper. "If this goes wrong, I lose everything. That child is my key to the estate. Do you understand? She is not leaving this house." Grace listened from the hallway, her hands trembling. She pressed her lips shut, but her heart hammered wildly. She knew what Clara was capable of, and she knew she couldn't stay silent any longer. That night, she slipped another recording into Alexander's mailbox, Clara's voice dripping with hatred, plotting to forge reports. The next morning, Turner filed the petition in court. Within hours, the judge scheduled an emergency hearing. Clara appeared with her lawyer, Victor Hale, tall and cold-eyed. She carried the forged medical certificate, the falsified pregnancy reports, and letters supposedly from a psychologist. Alexander arrived with Turner, Grace's recordings, Olivia's school reports, Linda's testimony, and the damning video footage. Emma sat quietly beside Alexander, her small hand clasped in his. Her eyes darted nervously toward Clara, but this time, when Clara's glare tried to pierce her, Emma pressed closer to Alexander instead. The judge studied both sides with a grave expression. "This case will determine the safety and custody of the child. Present your evidence." Victor was first. He spoke with polished words, painting Clara as a devoted stepmother overwhelmed by a stubborn, troubled child. He submitted the forged medical report, claiming Emma had a psychological disorder. "Isolation and discipline," he said smoothly, "were unfortunate but necessary measures. My client, pregnant and vulnerable, only wanted what was best." The judge nodded, making notes. Then it was Turner's turn. He played the video footage. The courtroom fell silent as Emma appeared on the screen, dragged into the basement, locked away, pounding weakly on the door. Her tiny frame curled against the cold ground. Gasps echoed. Even the judge's face tightened. Next, Turner played Clara's voice from Grace's recording. "That child is my key to the estate. She is not leaving this house." The silence was deafening. Clara leapt to her feet, her face white with fury. "Lies! All of it! Fabricated!" But the judge raised a hand sharply. "Enough! Sit down!" Alexander felt Emma's small fingers tremble against his. He looked down at her, and she looked back, her lips trembling. Slowly, with all the courage she could gather, she whispered, "Daddy can't hear me anymore, but Mr. Reed can." Tears burned in Alexander's eyes. He held her hand tighter. For the first time in years, he felt whole. The courtroom felt heavy, as though the very air held its breath. Emma's trembling words, "Daddy can't hear me anymore, but Mr. Reed can," still hung in the silence like fragile glass that no one dared to break. Judge Coleman leaned forward, her eyes grave. "We will hear further testimony before reaching a decision." Victor Hale rose, adjusting his tie, his voice smooth but firm. "Your Honor, the opposing side has brought forth videos and recordings, but we cannot confirm their authenticity. These could have been doctored. My client is a pregnant woman who has endured unimaginable stress. She should not be vilified for one moment of frustration." Clara nodded quickly, her eyes glistening with fake tears. She pressed a hand against her stomach, her voice breaking just enough to sound convincing. "I only wanted Emma to eat, to grow, to be healthy. I may have been impatient, but I love her. She's all I have left of my husband." Several people in the audience murmured sympathetically. For a brief moment it seemed her performance might sway the room, but Turner rose calmly, holding up a folder. "Your Honor, the defense claims pregnancy. We request official verification from the hospital." The judge gestured. A bailiff handed over sealed documents that Turner had arranged earlier. The judge scanned them, then looked up sharply. "These records confirm Mrs. Clara Carter is not pregnant. The certificates presented were falsified." A gasp rippled through the room. Clara's face drained of color. Turner's voice cut through the silence. "This alone reveals the lengths the defendant will go to manipulate the court, but there is more." He signaled to Detective Maria Santos, who had just entered with a USB drive. She placed it on the evidence table. "This," she said firmly, "is an extracted phone recording between Mrs. Carter, her attorney Victor Hale, and Dr. Gregory Collins, the so-called psychologist. In it, they discuss fabricating a diagnosis to declare Emma unstable and secure the estate for Mrs. Carter." The judge's eyes narrowed. "Play it." The audio filled the courtroom. Clara's cold voice. "That child is my key to the estate. Make the report say she's unfit." Then Victor's low tone. "A falsified pregnancy certificate will strengthen custody." Finally, Dr. Collins. "I haven't examined her, but if the papers are signed, no one will question it." The room erupted. Murmurs, gasps, angry whispers. The judge banged the gavel sharply. "Order!" Clara shot to her feet, her face twisted in rage. "Lies! They're all lies! You can't take her from me. She's mine. Without her, I have nothing." Her mask had shattered completely. Emma flinched at Clara's scream, her small body shaking. Alexander instinctively pulled her close, shielding her with his arms. Turner's voice rose, calm but resolute. "Your Honor, the evidence is overwhelming. Emma has endured starvation, imprisonment, and psychological abuse. We request full custody be granted to Mr. Alexander Reed, along with immediate protection for the child." The judge looked down at Emma, who sat pressed against Alexander's side. "Emma," she said gently, "do you want to say anything more?" Emma's small hand trembled as she picked up a pen from the table. She leaned over a sheet of paper and slowly, shakily, wrote 4 words. "I trust Mr. Reed." She slid the note forward. The judge read it aloud, her voice steady. "I trust Mr. Reed." The courtroom went silent. Then Judge Coleman raised her gavel. "This court grants full custody of Emma Carter to Mr. Alexander Reed. Mrs. Clara Carter is convicted of child abuse, falsification of medical documents, and conspiracy. She will be remanded into custody pending further trial. Mr. Victor Hale and Dr. Gregory Collins will face criminal investigation for their roles in this matter." The gavel struck with finality. Bang! The decision was made. Clara shrieked, lunging forward as officers moved to restrain her. "You can't do this! That child owes me everything. Without me, she's nothing!" But her words were drowned out by the clatter of handcuffs closing around her wrists. Emma buried her face in Alexander's chest, trembling. He stroked her hair softly, whispering, "It's over. You're safe now." For the first time, he felt her small body relax in his arms as if the weight of years had finally lifted. In the days that followed, the story spread quietly through the neighborhood. Mrs. Linda Green baked apple pies for Emma. Grace, free of Clara's shadow, came to visit often, smiling gently as she brought small gifts. Miss Olivia Scott hugged Emma at school, tears in her eyes as she whispered, "You're stronger than anyone I know." Alexander adjusted to a new rhythm of life. Mornings began with breakfast at the kitchen table, Emma drawing with her crayons while he read the paper. Evenings were filled with laughter that had long been absent from his mansion. One afternoon, he found her sketching under the oak tree in the garden. She looked up at him, her eyes brighter than he had ever seen. She signed slowly with her hands, words she had learned at school therapy. "I love you." Alexander's throat tightened. He bent down, pulling her into his arms. "I love you too, Emma, and I'll always hear you." Weeks later, they returned to the grave. Emma placed fresh flowers on the stone, her lips trembling as she whispered one last time, "Daddy, you can rest now. Someone hears me." Alexander stood behind her, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. Together, they stood in silence as the wind rustled the branches above. The graveyard no longer felt heavy. For Emma, it was no longer the place where her voice went unheard. It was the place where her cry had finally been answered. This story reminds us that silence can be as loud as a scream when we choose to listen. Which moment touched you most? When Emma whispered at the grave? Or when she wrote, "I trust Mr. Reed" in court? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story brought you even a little warmth, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Are you doing okay? Have you eaten? Remember, you are not alone. Take care of yourself, because kindness always begins at home. The weeks after the trial were like stepping into a new world for Emma. Gone were the nights of locked doors and empty plates. Gone were the cruel whispers that told her she was nothing. Instead, mornings began with sunlight pouring through open curtains, the smell of warm pancakes filling the air, and Alexander's steady voice calling gently from the kitchen, "Emma, breakfast is ready." At first, Emma moved cautiously, as if afraid the kindness would vanish. She would peek into the kitchen, her small body tense, her eyes wary. But when Alexander smiled at her, setting down a plate with her favorite berries, she would relax, slowly, cautiously, like a flower opening after a long winter. Therapy sessions began at the community center with Dr. Leah Simmons, a soft-spoken woman who specialized in child trauma. She showed Emma simple sign language, teaching her how to express feelings she had buried too deep. The first word Emma learned was safe. She signed it hesitantly one afternoon while sitting across from Alexander. Her hands trembled, but when he repeated the sign back, his voice steady, "Yes, Emma, you're safe." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She threw her arms around him, clinging tightly, as though testing whether he truly meant it. He held her until the tremors faded. Slowly, laughter returned. One evening, Alexander came home from work to find Emma painting at the table. She had drawn a house with a red roof, a garden, and two figures standing side by side, a tall man and a little girl, both smiling. At the bottom she had scrawled in uneven letters, "Home." Alexander picked up the drawing, his throat tightening. "Is this us?" he asked. Emma nodded shyly. Then she signed, "Family." For a long time, he could not speak. He simply pulled her into his arms, whispering, "Yes, family." Grace, now free from Clara's shadow, often visited. She would bring little treats, a box of cookies, a warm scarf she knitted. Each time she saw Emma smile, she whispered, "I'm so glad you're happy now." Linda, the neighbor, baked apple pies and insisted Emma eat 2 slices, laughing gently when the child's cheeks turned pink. Miss Olivia, her teacher, praised her new drawings in class, telling the other children, "Emma has the heart of a warrior." Bit by bit, the community that had once looked away now surrounded Emma with love. One afternoon, Alexander took Emma to the park. The air was crisp, the trees alive with color. Children ran, laughing, chasing kites. Emma watched quietly at first, her stuffed rabbit tucked under her arm. "Go on," Alexander encouraged softly. "You can play." She hesitated, then took a step forward. Another child smiled at her, holding out a ball. Slowly, Emma joined the game. For the first time in years, her laughter rang out clear, bright, unbroken. Alexander sat on the bench, his chest swelling with something he hadn't felt in decades: peace. A month later, they returned to the graveyard together. Emma carried a bouquet of fresh lilies. She knelt by her father's stone, pressing the flowers gently into the soil. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Daddy, I'm safe now." Alexander stood behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. This time, her words were not swallowed by silence. This time, someone heard. She turned, looking up at him. Her eyes shone with tears, but also with something stronger, hope. "Thank you," she whispered softly. Alexander knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "No, Emma, thank you. You reminded me what it means to be a father. You saved me, just as much as I saved you." Together, they stood in the gentle breeze. The cemetery no longer felt heavy. It was no longer a place of fear, but of remembrance, a reminder that even in the darkest silence, a voice could still be heard if someone cared enough to listen. My dear viewers, this story was not just about a child's pain. It was about the courage to stand up, the strength to listen, and the healing that comes when love replaces cruelty. Tell me, what moment touched your heart the most? When Emma whispered at the grave that her daddy couldn't hear her? When she drew the word, "help"? Or when she finally wrote, "I trust Mr. Reed"? Please leave your thoughts in the comments. If this story gave you even a little hope, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs courage today. And let me ask you, are you doing okay? Have you eaten? Remember, you're not alone. Someone will always hear you if you whisper. Because kindness is never wasted. It is the voice that turns silence into healing.